Hello and welcome to Southern Circuit. I'm Rickley Stone. Tonight's journey takes us to Brinson, Georgia for a visit to Spring Creek Pottery, a family business and dream come true for artists Ralph Weaver, his daughter Sharon, and her husband Dennis Falk. In Quincy, Florida, we'll meet a local favorite, 93-year-old Pokey Williams.
If you give love out, you get love back. There's no other way.
We'll stop in at the Lafayette vineyard for a tour and a taste of some of Tallahassee's own fine wines. But first, producer Eleanor Crow begins tonight's journey with Tallahassee ecologist Bruce Means, who's dedicated his life to making others aware of our environment and how to preserve it for generations to come.
Let me say I'm an ecologist, meaning that I study nature. Of course, I love nature, so I am an environmentalist. It means that I spend an awful lot of my time, both in a vocation way and an avocation way, being interested in and involved in environmental matters. I mean, it's my religion, it's my life, I live it. I teach it, I study it, and I love it.
In 1984, Bruce walked the same 1,000-mile route from Kentucky to Florida walked by naturalist John Muir over 100 years ago. Much of the natural beauty that Muir had seen and written about was obviously gone.
Everywhere, the natural qualities of nature are being eliminated by human activities, or we're changing them dramatically. We're kind of fortunate in Tallahassee to be in a semi-backwater of development. Now, I say that meaning that it's been a long time coming, and development is nevertheless on us. You know, Tallahassee's grown considerably, and North Florida is now really burgeoning. It's part of the new Sun Belt. And because the coastal areas up here are fairly low energy coasts, haven't been well developed, they're now the last frontier, and it's coming this way fast. This area, meaning from about Tallahassee over to about Mariana, and then from the Florida border down to the Gulf Coast, is exceedingly rich biologically. It probably has more species of animals and plants than anywhere else on the continent north of Mexico. Well, for instance, trees. Florida has more trees than any other state. Part of that's due to the richness of the tropical influence at the south of the peninsula. We happen to have the most snakes locally, about 46, 48 species.
Dr. Means was director of Tall Timbers Research Station north of Tallahassee for 15 years. He did a study there on the behavior of eastern diamondback rattlesnakes by tracking them with radio transmitters.
Here we go. This is typical. A big, nice, healthy rattlesnake crossing a local country road. It's exactly how you find them. Usually in the late morning, like this, about 11 o'clock. This is a normal-sized adult male. They get a little larger than this, maybe another foot. This is about a 5-foot snake. Large animal, cycles lots of rodents. The telemetry study I did on these creatures for about, a 5-year period revealed an awful lot of very interesting facts about their biology. They're more common than we realize. They're quite secretive. They grow very rapidly. In August is when they mate, and then a year later in the same month, the female drops her young, about 14. The babies are fairly large at birth. They're about 14 inches long. And they're able to eat a full-sized adult mouse immediately at birth. Rattlesnakes, as with most snakes, are generally very quiet, shy animals that like to be left alone. But they do have a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. You hear the rattling? Now that I'm agitating the snake, I don't want to agitate it too much. I don't like to upset them. You don't want to get close to the working end either.
Well, I didn't purposely set out to try to start a snake fan club, and I'm still not doing so, but snakes are as interesting and as wonderful in their marvels that they possess as creatures on this globe as any other group. I happen to be raised in a way that I wasn't conditioned to be frightened of snakes. And when I first arrived here about 25 years ago, snakes were everywhere. Among other animals, I became fascinated with them, and it eventually led to a lot of professional activities studying them. Snakes are sort of one of the ways that I got interested in the broader aspects of ecology, which I'm mostly interested in. But I do special research problems with snakes. But what I've done here is I've looked at another animal. It's just like humans, it's like dogs and cats, like plants, that has variation normally in it, which has been expressed in a special way in an area where becoming lighter was advantageous for a while. Typical, normal evolutionary response that happens. In fact, there are many examples of evolution that have happened in nature that we've documented, and it's through breeding studies that we get our closest, most rigorous look at evolutionary phenomena. It turns out, after all this breeding study, this is an intermediate between the normal snake and this very light-colored one. Now, what is interesting is the animals that are different are geographically found in one area. That is the lower Apalachicola Valley. And not only is the king snake different there, but there are 15 to 20 animals and plants that are found there and nowhere else in the world. And they all have evolved there because for some reason that area was probably, something about that area was isolated and a little different from today, allowing these animals and plants to diverge from their ancestors. By studying the king snakes, I learned a lot about what was unique about that area. All of my interests in the ecology of this area have sort of come together right now. I am involved in teaching a number of courses, a couple of courses through the Center for Professional Development at FSU on the ecology of the Big Bend area. Essentially, I wanted you to get the feeling for the interfluve xeric communities and the... I really truly believe that if people, all the folks of this region, were as interested in the area as I am, or even partly as interested in it, we would all be more concerned about how we impact nature, and would want to impact nature in different ways than we do, in better ways, let's say. And if I can help open their eyes to what is good about this region, that's what makes me excited.
When Southern Circuit traveled to Brinson, Georgia recently, we wanted to find out what a particular fish camp and pottery gallery had in common. The answer we found was a family affair of 3 talented artists.
We have a little bit of everything. We have the pottery, we have the fish camp. Home, this is home.
For retired serviceman Ralph Weaver, his daughter Sharon, and son-in-law Dennis Falk, this home is a dream come true.
We came from Stone Mountain about 6 years ago. We were looking for a place to establish a pottery and had been looking at an old mill in North Georgia, grits mill, when we found out about this place. And I do love to fish, and the wife and I came down and we said it had lots of potential. So we ended up, said, yeah, we're willing to put the work into it, and we're slowly developing it, into what we more or less dreamed about. It's not there yet, but we're working and we're having fun.
Came down to help them run the fish camp, and so my duties were, anything from fixing broken plumbing to just help maintaining the place. But it was also gave me an opportunity to photograph the area. It gave me a lot. In my off time, I could sort of wander around the landscape and shoot, and then of course then I exhibit the work in the gallery also.
It's neat to have your own place, and a place that's growing, that you meet people through, and the ones that like your work are the ones that come back and that you develop a rapport with. So that's what the store is for me.
I like drawing and painting, and when I got out of service, I felt that that's where I was going to go, into drawing and painting, and I went back used my GI Bill and went back to Georgia State with the idea of getting a degree in art in the drawing and painting field. But once I got into it, being an engineer, my basic background is engineering. Once I got into the art field, they told me, they being the instructors, that I'd have to start from day one as far as art goes. I had all the prerequisites for English and history and science and things, but to get a degree in art, I'd have to start from basic, colors. So I ended up spending several years in the art area. One of the things that they required was that you branch out of your field into some other discipline. So I picked ceramics.
Well, I originally started in school in art, and it happened that we were correspondingly in school together. And he was down in the pot studio, and I was up drawing and everything. And when I'd go down, we'd ride to school together. I would see these incredible pots being made. It was magic. So when it came time for me to take three-dimensional courses, I headed down to the pottery studio and got into it that way. Once I was in there, that was all I wanted to do.
I like to make one of a kind, or if it's not one of a kind, at least each piece has its own distinctive individual characteristic.
My work is much more functional. I love to cook and I love to eat, and so therefore I like to make things to use with that would make food neat, pretty and attractively served and very functional. I like pitchers that pour really nicely, or teapots that pour smooth, and plates that make vegetables look pretty on them and stuff like that. So his work is much more gutsy and masculine, I think. Mine is more refined, definitely more functional than his.
I guess something that I think about a lot when I'm photographing, this area seems to have sort of a timelessness to it, that things do change down here, but they don't change as quickly as say, in a more urban environment. And it's a real subtle area. And before I moved down here, when I would go out to photograph, I was looking for sort of a phenomenon, interesting, something to take a picture of. But here it's more I'm photographing my home, and it's been that sort of aspect has been real special to me, and the work that I've been doing down here is, to me, is a lot more. I think it's a lot more convincing, and it's a lot less self-conscious than anything I was doing before, mainly because I'm photographing someplace that I really love, and that's kind of special.
I am not encumbered with the having to make a living from my work, which is very fortunate. I consider myself to be very lucky. A lot of people have to be production potters if they want to be potters, and I can have the time and the luxury of just making what I want to when I want to.
I would like to see that it become a center where for not necessarily art pottery, but a very good functional pottery that people in the area, or even say as far as Jacksonville or down to Tampa, could come to and know that they're getting quality pottery, with not just Sharon and myself, but other potters also contributing to the selection of pottery available.
Whatever Ralph Weaver's goals are for Spring Creek Pottery, they're bound to come true, just as his dream has, to retire to a nice place in the country, fish and make pots. And what a nice dream it is. When
most people think of Florida, they think of beaches and sunshine and palm trees and coconuts. Rarely does wine come to mind, but actually Florida is home to 4 wineries, and you might be surprised to find out that the largest is practically in our own backyard. The setting looks just like any hillside in France or valley in California. But it's not. It's actually just a few miles east of Tallahassee, where the grapes of the Lafayette vineyard are grown, harvested, processed, and eventually bottled to be sold as one of Tallahassee's own fine wines.
We feel real good about our ability to compete. We've been in a few tastings, blind tastings against California. One tasting that was held in Washington, D.C. had us placed against Robert Mondavi's Sauvignon Blanc with our stover, and our stover had something like 6 out of 8 people favored it over the Mondavi, so I was very impressed.
The winemaking business is not exactly the romantic venture some would have you believe. In fact, owner Gary Cox got into it not even out of any great interest in wine. He did it for perhaps the least romantic reason of all.
As a practicing CPA, I was reviewing some proposals of some clients relative to putting in some vineyards and so forth. The more I checked out how the numbers looked, the more interested I became.
So in spite of the fact that his experience with winemaking was limited to a few homemade batches, he and his family decided to give it a try anyway.
The kids had participated with us in planting a vineyard, and they knew so much about it that they knew that the leaves had come out one summer, and it was then in the fall of the year, and all the leaves were falling off of the vines, and my daughter said, "Gee, Mom, I'm scared to death about Daddy doing that. All the ones we planted died." So had to explain quickly to her that it was normal for the leaves to drop off in the winter, that they had not all died. There's a lot of hard work in it. There's a good deal of satisfaction seeing something come off of the vines and then in through the grape, in through good wine, and then made where you can sell it on to the public, and the response of somebody drinking your wine and saying, "Hey, this is good." It's great.
What is the best thing about owning a winery?
I think probably the tasting samples is the most glamorous part of it, when you sit down at the table and try out 4 or 5 new wines and try to evaluate which one's going to be the best. The fun part of that is in seeing if you came out right, which one you picked and said this would be the best seller, and if it turns out to be the best seller.
Would you like that one, or you're waiting for something sweeter? We'll get to it.
It's starting to get close for me. That costs for It's not bad. It's very good.
I would have thought that people would have been very reluctant to sample the wines, then take them at their own pace without a preconceived notion. What we have seen is that most people will sample the wines, and when we describe to them that this may be a little fruitier than they're used to in terms of the muscadines, that the hybrids will be much more similar to what they might have been used to in California or France, then they accept that for face value, and many of them say if there had been a wine like this before, I would have been drinking wine a long time before.
What is the secret to making a good wine?
I think you have to have good grapes to start off with, and then you have to have good equipment, and then you have to have good people that know how to use that equipment and those grapes. And with that, you can make a very good wine. A lot of the things about how the dirt and the soil is and the slope and so forth, that helps you make sure you're going to get those good grapes.
There's no real secret. It's just a matter of keeping your product clean, your environment clean, and being conscientious about keeping tabs on it, like any other product.
Did you ever have a moment in the development of this winery when you thought you'd made a major mistake with it?
Oh, I think only about 10 or 12 times have I thought that. It's very easy when you go in and you talk to a retailer and he doesn't have enough room on his shelf and he's already got more inventory than he wants, and he's got to think up some reason for why he doesn't want your wine on his shelf, and so he says, I'm not interested in any of that junk y'all are making out there. And if that happens about 3 times in the same day, then you question yourself, and then if the next day the guy says, people have been asking for your wine in my store for 2 months. What took you so long to get here? And then you say, I did the right thing.
She's always been a fan of the arts, so when a Hawaiian dance troupe came through the Suwannee County town where she lived and nicknamed her Pukalulu, the name stuck, becoming Pookie and finally Pokey. Today, Pokey Williams lives in Quincy, where she's loved by all who know her, simply for being who she is.
I cannot sing the old songs I sang long years ago, for heart and voice would fail me and foolish tears would flow. For bygone hours come o'er my heart with each familiar strain. I cannot sing the old songs or dream those dreams again. I cannot sing the old songs or dream those dreams again.
To say that 93-year-old Catherine Williams cannot sing the old songs she sang years ago would be as inaccurate as saying that she cannot recite poems, paint, dance, or tell stories either. But Pokey, as she prefers to be called, does them all, with the same aplomb as years ago.
No matter how old a prune may be, it's always full of wrinkles. I've had a wonderful life. I was a graduate nurse, I say, when I was 23 years old. I was a graduate then, I worked in New York. So, what else is there left for me? Singing, music, dancing, nursing, and writing a book when I get to it. I used to write little stories for the garden club. I want to read one to you sometime, just a little story. It was more spiritual than the stories you hear in this material world, you know what I mean? Guess what? I'm going to talk about gold. What is more important to you? Man's gold or God's love? Or what is the pearl of great price when you find it, you'll sell all you possess to keep it? 2,000 years ago, there lived a man we are worshiping and honoring after 2,000 years. Why? Because he chose love. For what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? So why not plant goldenrod in your garden to enrich it, which has both love and gold? That was one of my originals I gave to a garden club, and I loved it. Now you see what I mean by the spiritual, don't you? My husband passed on. I was left alone. And I got interested in painting. I'll show you the little ones I started with out there. Since then I've done all these that you see in this room. I'd get up in the middle of the night and paint. And so I start painting everything. Ist dein Schnitzelbank? Ja, das ist dein Schnitzelbank. Ist das nicht dein Hund und Herr? Ja, das ist ein Hund und Herr. Schnitzelbank, ein und Herr. I do shane, Schnitzelbank. They take a drink. We were brought up in the German Lutheran church, where they sang all the Bach music, all that good music, Bach music. And we learned it in German. First, we used to have 150 in our choir, and that's where I learned music. And then when I married the finest musician you could ever find, a concert singer, you know. And he studied German to help his music. And so I kept up with my music. And I sang in this choir here for 28 years. 28 years, I think. He was there for 33.
Ask Pokey about exact dates, and she can't tell you. Says she doesn't keep track of time. But Pokey herself marks time for the folks in Quincy, where for years she was a local fixture downtown.
I wasn't here very long when Mr. May came up and asked me to come and work in the May Drug Company, which is the oldest drugstore in the state of Florida. It's May Drug Company. And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, I want you to come and work. He said, you can name any salary you want or work on a commission. But he said, I think if I know you like I know you, you better work on commission. And so I started with May Drug Company. I was there for 28 years. And I installed all the art. I used to sell music boxes from Germany. And people came all the way up here from Miami and found them here in Quincy. And it was wonderful working for them, but then they retired me, you know. I didn't want to retire, but they retired me, so it's the end of that. But I loved it. Now I go to church. I go to the Chattahoochee Hospital and help with the services there. I take literature to the nursing homes. I belong to the Silver Teens, and I belong to the garden clubs. She doesn't know anything about this that's going on now. I kept pretty busy. Until just a short time ago, they thought I was doing too much. They said, Pokey, you better stay home and give up all those things you're doing. But I missed it. I did for a little while, but I'm getting back into it again. I'm not going to give that up. Promise me you'll keep this rose when I am far away. Promise me you'll always think of me both night and day. The time has come to say goodbye, the parting gives me pain. So promise me you'll keep this rose till I return again.
That's tonight's Southern Circuit. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time when Southern Circuit returns to Gadsden County for a visit with the Quincy Music Theater. In the meantime, if you have any story ideas for Southern Circuit, please let us know by writing to us, care of WFSU-TV, 2565 Potsdamer Street, Tallahassee, Florida, 32304. I'm Rickley Stone. For all of us on Southern Circuit, good night.
Be forgot and never brought to mind. Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne? For old lang, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness set for old lang syne.
A bagel is a cross between a bread and a roll because it uses the high gluten flour that is used in rye bread and other heavier breads, whereas rolls are made with a lighter flour that makes them light and fluffy. And a bagel is boiled before it's baked, so that gives it the chewy consistency. It's boiled and then it's dried in the oven and baked right on the hearth, and it's treated as more of a bread because you can use it in any kind of sandwich. My grandfather came from Europe in about 1916 as a pretzel baker. And he worked in New York as a pretzel baker, and when my father was old enough to work, he also joined in the pretzel baking field, and they found that they also could use the same equipment to make bagels. And the bagels took over, and they ended up making bagels and not making pretzels. And then when I was about 15 years old, I got a part-time job working in a basement in Brooklyn, New York, making bagels and helping as a helper. I put them in the kettle to boil them, and I took them out, and I would do that all night long as a helper and make a few dollars while I was going to school, and I did it all through high school and college. Okay, one story about the origin of bagels about 1732 was that the Jews in I don't know which country were forbidden to bake bread, and they tried to find a way around that by boiling their bread. And they put these rolls with holes in water to boil, but they didn't come out too good, so they snuck them in the oven, and they found something new, and they thought that was a great idea, and they just kept doing it for 300 years. We are using the same recipe that my father and grandfather used 50 years ago or more, with the best high gluten flour, and we use barley malt and yeast and salt and our own proportions that we have been using for generations to keep the quality that people come in here and say, these are just as good as I've had in New York or better than I've had in other southern cities, and they take bags full of bagels back to Miami and Atlanta and Orlando, and that's because I'm making these bagels the same way I've been making them for 22 years since I started. Till about 25 years ago, bagels were baked on very old brick ovens, because in New York City, where bagels originally developed into what they are today, they originated in Austria 300 years ago, but in New York City, the union was very strong. They had a Bagel Bakers Union local in New York, and they kept out all the modern revolving ovens because they made it too easy for anyone to bake bagels. So people had to use the brick oven, which was 14 feet deep and about 10 feet wide, and it was brick hearth. And the bagels, if they weren't the shape that they were, they'd roll all over this oven, and it would be extremely difficult. They were baked and into wicker baskets, and everything was kept by the union the union kept everything traditional until the 1960s, when there was such a demand for retail bagel business and sandwich shops that people kept opening bagel shops non-union, and unions got weaker, and they opened them with revolving modern ovens, and that ended a tradition of hundreds of years of brick oven hearth-baked bagels. We had 4 stores in New Jersey. My wife and I came down to visit my wife's parents in Tallahassee, and we just fell in love with Tallahassee, and we went back and sold the last 2 stores that we still had in New Jersey, and moved down here because we felt there was enough cosmopolitan people, and with the university and state employees being from all other parts of the country, Miami and New York, we felt that we really had a chance of supplying a need for something more unusual than just another restaurant. There are a lot of restaurants in Tallahassee, but we feel we are unique, and we do all kinds of different things than other restaurants do. And we're not only just a bagel bakery, we're a restaurant. We have a full sandwich line, catering and baking, and we're also getting into a lot of natural foods and baking all natural, organic, whole wheat bagels and breads, which we sell at the Leon County Food Co-op, and we ship to a couple other parts of the state.